Hello again, it's Evan. Um, I'm back again with Threefold Strangers. Yesterday I read Section 1, Part 1, and today I'm going to read Part 2. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hugo woke up in prison. Seeing the cell's bars confused him until he remembered meeting with Jackson. Once he noticed the dried blood on his clothes, he realized Jackson had framed him. Jackson told him he had to keep him safe. He wanted to believe that, because he wanted to believe Jackson hadn't killed Lako. Why did he need protection? Why did Jackson frame him? These questions had answers, but he had to find Jackson to provide them. He rose from the cot onto which the guards had laid or thrown him, he suspected, to go stand at the bars. He figured he could explain his innocence if he talked with a guard. If not to one of them, he figured he might be able to explain himself to the innkeeper if he could get in contact with him. Neither option mattered because as he stood and searched for guards, he saw that none were in sight. Hugo took a few steps back from the bars. What should he do? He glanced around his small cell for a second, trying to gather his thoughts, when he realized he was in a non-energist prison. Jackson told him to come find him in Lunaria after he got out of prison. Did Jackson expect him to break out? Whoever put him away must have assumed he was a non-energist because of the blood. He knew he could easily escape with his geo-energy. The circumstances of Lako's death must have been the reason he was sent here. Remembering the blood he saw on Jackson, he found the evidence began to stack against him. Lako hadn't deserved this end. Hugo had gone into almost every inn in this part of Russo. Every time, he barely approached the counter before the innkeeper or one of the members of the staff turned him away. A Solaresian in Lunastra was not well received. When he did manage to reach a counter, they would ask him one simple question. His answer to this question got him turned away too. Are you an energist? He could have lied, but he couldn't bring himself to lie when the truth would do. Before he resigned himself to sleeping in the woods, he tried one last inn. Moonflower Inn might not have been the largest or nicest inn he had encountered, but it looked affordable. He walked inside, and the guy leaning against the wall behind the counter appeared just about as ready for bed as him. Hugo read his name tag. Lako. Lako! Hugo turned to his left to see an older man stomping slowly down the stairs. He moved slowly, but he moved with a purpose. Hugo figured his purpose involved putting his hands around Lako's neck and strangling him. He also wore a name tag, Etsuo. Lako opened his eyes, blinked a few times, and yawned before he looked towards Etsuo. A second later, he stood up straight and appeared wide awake. Good evening, sir, Lako greeted him. How can I help you? Would you like a room for the night? You wanted to work the late shift? Etsuo told him. Work it. Etsuo walked behind the counter, stood beside Lako, and stared at the side of his head. He turned toward Hugo. I apologize for my son. Please, do not let his conduct deter you from staying with us, Mr. The two of them looked similar, in the face anyway. They couldn't be anything but father and son. They shared the same height, dark brown eyes, small nose, black hair, and pale skin. From Etsuo's fairly wrinkled skin and the streaks of gray in his hair, Hugo placed him in his mid-50s or early 60s. Lako could only be a few years younger than him, early 20s or late teens. Etsuo maintained long, unkempt hair, a moderate mustache, and a disheveled appearance. Leiko, on the other hand, maintained short, slightly unkempt hair, a clean-shaven face, and a tidy appearance. Kwaku, Hugo answered. No, not at all. I just hope you let me stay. You've met some of the other innkeepers, I see, Etsuo said. We don't share their same ideology. If you've got money, Leiko said, you're more than welcome to stay. Makes sense to me, Hugo said. He and Leiko laughed. Hey, Leiko said, do you happen to be an energist? Yes, Hugo said. Now you have to stay here, Leiko said. We never get energists here. He wants a room, Etsuo said. He doesn't want to hear you yammer on. It's fine, Hugo said. If you guys don't mind footing me a bed, I have no problem listening to some yammering. All right, Etsuo said, but you don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Mr. Kwaku. Hugo told him, feeling disrespectful having this older gentleman call him Mr. Hugo, Etsuo said, have a good night and enjoy your stay. Etsuo left from behind the counter and walked down the hallway by the stairs. Leiko leaned close and whispered, if you oblige me a bit of conversation, I'll give you your room for free. Hugo wanted to eat and drink merrily. More so, he wanted to fall in his bed, but he couldn't pass up this deal. I'm game, Hugo said. What's on your mind? I went to a null, non-energist school, Leiko said. He paused. Is null okay to say? If you don't consider it derogatory, Hugo replied. If you don't mind using it, go ahead. Right, Leiko said. My mother didn't like to speak of energists. She believed speaking of them brought trouble. A number of people are like that, Hugo said. Not me, Leiko said. I used to want to be an energist so bad. I heard about them, seen a few come through here, but considering this is a predominantly null town, I haven't had much luck learning about them. I'm headed off to an integrated school soon, but not soon enough. Gaterian University? Hugo questioned. That's the one, Leiko answered. That's my alma mater, Hugo said. If that's where you're headed, you're in for some great experiences. I can't wait, Leiko said. Do you mind telling me how it all works? What's your element? Not at all, Hugo answered. Earth. I'm a geoenergist. Does that mean you can control Earth with your mind? Leiko asked. Yes and no, Hugo said. With their minds, energists channel soul energy to manipulate the elements or harness it to produce elements. Oh, Leiko said. So that's why energists are classified as kinetics or genetics. Yes, Hugo said. Some can control an element, kinetics, while others can go beyond that and generate an element from their own bodies, genetics. The element or elements energists can use depends upon which element their soul energy is attuned, Leiko surmised. Correct, Hugo confirmed. That makes sense, Leiko said. But what I don't get is the difference between a powerful and skillful energist. Powerful energists can be a great help or do great harm with their abilities, Hugo told him. Skillful energists, on the other hand, can do amazing feats with their abilities. For example, hydroenergists, who are skillful, might be able to change their bodies into water. Powerful hydroenergists couldn't, but they might be able to form or bring forth a giant tidal wave. And that would depend on whether they were kinetic or genetic, Leiko added. Hugo nodded. Man, you're so lucky. Do you know what I would do if I was a skillful arrow energist? I would have flown out of this place years ago. What do you plan to study while at GU? Hugo asked. Soul energy, Leko said. I want to become an energist scientist and see if I can find a way to give gnolls the ability to use soul energy. Make them energists. Lofty goal, Hugo replied. Would you mind going out back with me and showing me what you can do? Leko asked. Should you stay here and work? Hugo questioned. The only reason I wanted to work the late night shift is because no one comes in this late, Leko said. Besides, life's too short not to enjoy it once in a while. I'll be back in time to do my end of shift duties. You make a good point, Hugo said. He smiled. Let's go. That's when it must have happened. When Leko proceeded to do his end of shift duties, someone killed him. If the warden found him guilty of the crime, Hugo would get a life sentence. He wanted to prove his innocence, but also wanted to meet with Jackson. He looked around his cell for a minute, imagining his stay in it, but afterward, he pictured meeting with Jackson, getting answers to his questions about him and their missing dad. He decided to break free. He was innocent anyway. If this were someone else, as Jackson suggested, he would bring the real killer to justice. Using his geoenergy, he pulled stones from the adjacent wall and replaced them after he walked into a corridor. He only walked a few steps before he heard hurried footsteps headed in his direction. After he quickly hid behind some nearby stairs, he heard the guards run past him. We saw him on the monitors, Hugo heard one of the guards report. The new prisoner. He used geoenergy to escape his cell. We need to find him before he finds his way out of here. Hugo couldn't believe he forgot to expect this kind of prison to have a silent alarm or video cameras. In his defense, he never expected to be in any kind of prison. Lunastran prisons had technologically advanced a bit more than some other non-energist prisons. He had studied this. No reason to dwell on it. Better to keep on the move. He came from behind the stairs and climbed them. After checking down each end of the corridor, he went to his right. If he could, he hoped to avoid running into trouble. Searching for an exit became his top priority. He searched for a while, wasn't sure how long, and he winded up where he started. Even though that frustrated him, he realized he was lucky to have not run into any guards. They were nearby at every turn, probably because of the cameras, but he always heard them and continued to evade them. After exploring a few of the corridors, there didn't seem to be a way out, but he knew this couldn't be true. The guards were coming after him somehow. He decided he'd pass his cell and go in the opposite direction, which led him to a lift. He found it odd none of the prison's guards had pinpointed his location, and none of them were keeping watch over this lift. What came to mind upon seeing the lift was the setup of a trap. The guards were going to let him come to them. He noticed a panel next to the lift doors. The lift needed a security code for the doors to open. When the doors slid open, the guards proved him right. 2 guards stepped from the lift with firearms aimed at him. Hugo nodded with a short smile. The Lunastrans hadn't built this prison to hold a geoenergist. He had no need to worry about such a small threat. He could handle it safely. He broke and removed the stones underneath the guards, dropping them through the floor, but made sure they landed unharmed. Bringing the stones back to their proper place, he fixed the floor before he pulled and took stones from the wall next to the lift. Using those stones, he placed a small platform in front of himself and stepped onto it. The wall restored, he moved through the interior of the prison to avoid any traps and guards that might be waiting and any cameras that might be surveying his movements. Hugo planned to escape the prison from the roof. It would provide his exit. Following the lift's path, he went up as far as he could and stopped when he found himself faced with steel. He tried to leave from the adjacent exterior wall, but again he found himself faced with steel. He couldn't break through the roof or the wall with them laced with steel. Perhaps the Lunastrans had prepared for geoenergists. He brought himself back down a level before he broke down part of the interior wall. After stepping off his platform and rebuilding the wall, he walked through this new corridor. He knew if the cameras caught him, they would show the guards where he was, so he placed himself against the wall and treaded lightly. Hugo started getting hunger pains. That's what reminded him he hadn't eaten for hours. The journey to Russo had tired him out, and the search for an inn had drained him. People wouldn't let a Solaresian stay at their inn, especially an Energist Solaresian. But Lako and his father had given him a room. When he finally reached it, after his geoenergist demonstration, he collapsed on his bed and went right to sleep. He hadn't thought about food, especially when he had gotten too busy having fun. He hadn't wanted to put them out, and the day had exhausted him. He wished he had eaten now. Hunger and thirst were gnawing at him. At that moment, he decided he'd never go to sleep without a meal again. He saw this corridor led to a bridge, which crossed to another side of the prison. Two guards stood at the bridge with their backs to him. One smoked a cigarette, and for some reason they were both laughing. He saw this as an opportunity to avoid a confrontation. As he headed in the opposite direction, he heard someone yelling. It stopped him. He turned toward it and saw a third guard drag a woman off the bridge. She was the one who held the guard's attentions. "Listen to me," she shouted at them. "You cannot do this." "Quiet down," the guard dragging her said. He looked like a bear, tall and menacing, and just about sounded like one. "After what you did, you don't deserve any respect." The guard threw her in front of him, and all three guards laughed. She looked older than him, but not much older. He suspected she was in her late 20s. He watched her sit on her legs, lift her head, and look directly at him. Their eyes met. He only thought that was a little strange, just a little. The torches which lit the corridors illuminated her dark brown eyes, shoulder-length dark brown hair, and fair complexion. These traits he attributed to the native Lunastrans. Even with shackles around her wrists and chains around her body, she seemed calm in that moment when their eyes met. Mindful of the guards that could appear behind him at any moment, Hugo turned from the sight to leave. He wanted to help her, but for all he knew, she was there for a good reason. Even so, he didn't like the idea of guards treating inmates this way. He couldn't take a step forward. "Don't get involved." He heard these words in his head. "Get out of here. You don't have to do anything. I'll be okay." He turned back. Her eyes caught his again. He watched her stand, watching him, before she turned her attention to the guards. She bowed her head before them. He stared at the back of her. Is she a telepath and an empath? To speak to him with her thoughts, she had to be a telepath. And to know he felt he had to help her, she had to be an empath. Wait a minute. Could she be a Kura? "Sir," the smoking guard said, putting out his cigarette on the underside of his boot. He faced his superior, who was the third guard. He held Hugo and the woman's attention. Hugo wasn't far from them, so he heard every word. I've received word that the murderer from Russo who escaped is down this corridor. You're late, the superior officer said, sounding annoyed and angry. He's standing over there. I noticed him the minute I stepped off this bridge. Are you telling me you couldn't see him? Wait a minute. They're talking about me. Hugo stopped thinking about the woman who could be Akira and whether he should help her. He paid attention to what he'd heard. The guards knew he was there. They probably had been biding their time to sneak up on him and capture him. He struggled with his decision to leave or save Akira, like his brother had instructed. This might not even be her. Go, he heard her in his head. Before he could make a decision, he turned toward the lift, facing the guards he heard emerge from it. The 3 guards from the lift made their way toward him. He hadn't expected this to happen. He backed away while he kept an eye on the guards. He felt the woman didn't belong here. He felt she might be connected to Jackson. He wanted to trust that feeling, even though he had no proof. Jackson had never steered him wrong, but that was before. Jackson said you'd do this. Hugo turned to her. She faced him. Her comment left him taken aback. Do what? Risk his life and freedom for a stranger? Stand down, the superior guard instructed, walking toward him. I'm the commanding officer of this prison. I've never lost a man, energist or otherwise. Don't intend to start now. Before anything happened, Hugo tried logic while watching the CO approach him. I understand you're an outstanding officer of the law, Hugo began, but I'm innocent. I know you've probably heard that 1,000 times, but Etsuo can vouch for me. I only broke out of my cell because I have a lead on the real killer. At least, I think I do. Plus, I know this sounds crazy, but I believe she's innocent too. Granted, he didn't know what the woman supposedly did. He tried to help her out. She knew Jackson. That had to count for something. Jackson had set him up to meet her. Akira. This had to be her. CO yanked the chain connected to her chains and pulled her into his grasp. You 5 can handle this, the CO said, speaking to his men and ignoring him. I'm going to escort her to the warden. Get him back in his cell. And this time, make sure to put the Faison cuffs on him. CO dragged the woman off to the left as 4 of the guards surrounded him with their firearms. He watched after the woman. He had to get to her, not only to rescue her, but also to question her about Jackson. Regardless if she was innocent, guards didn't treat their prisoners this way. Something wasn't right. You don't have to worry about her, the 5th guard said, standing off from the others and focusing on lighting his 2nd cigarette. He drew Hugo's attention. She won't be with us much longer. She's received a death sentence from the warden. It'll be carried out tonight. If you cooperate with us, maybe he'll go easier on you. He smirked. During his monologue, Hugo broke and removed the stones from underneath the 4 guards that surrounded him. He dropped them safely below. He smiled when the smoking guard raised his head and saw his comrades gone. He dropped him below before he had a chance to grab his weapon. He ran for Akira. No wonder the CO seemed annoyed. His guards were incompetent. Hugo ran for Akira while wondering if he was wrong about her. Was Jackson setting him up to release an accomplice? To receive a death sentence, she had to have done something unforgivable. However, he remembered death sentences had been outlawed about 220 years ago. The 3 continents had reached a mutual consensus back then. Akira might know his brother, but he didn't know his brother anymore. So he didn't know what kind of company he kept nowadays or what to expect of him. Even though he had his doubts, he still opted to go after her. If anything, he had to talk with her. He watched the CO and his prisoner come to an area that contained 3 lifts. All criminals must be punished for their crimes, the CO told the woman. I'm sorry your life has to end like this, but Kotaro didn't deserve to die at your hands. All criminals must be punished. The CO continued to drag her, hurting her, but she only watched him somberly. Hugo saw and heard this upon arriving at the end of the corridor. He also noticed the 3 lifts. They were about to bring him more trouble. He heard men behind him, so he ran into the area. The CO turned to face him as 2 of the lifts opened. 2 guards stepped out of each lift and stood beside the CO with Faison firearms in hand. The 4 guards from earlier came from the rear with firearms ready. The smoking guard also arrived with a cigarette in his mouth and his firearm on him. Sorry, sir, he got away from us, the smoking guard said. He's a geoenergist. If you ever hope to climb the ranks, the CO said, you'll need to be less of a screw-up. I'll cut you some slack this time. You haven't had much experience dealing with geoenergists. Hugo wanted to ignore the fact he had no idea how he'd get out of this mess, let alone occur too. Glancing at his surroundings, he formulated a plan. He could drop the others all at the same time, but he didn't know how he'd handle the CO, especially since he had Akura's chain. Because he didn't know whether the CO was an energist or non-energist, he wanted to avoid a fight. CO's comment earlier about never having let anyone escape leaned him toward energist. If he was an energist, Hugo was sure he was powerful. He didn't want to hurt anyone or get hurt. He remembered the suffocation from earlier. Remembering made him wonder if Jackson had tried to prepare him for situations like this. When you fail to make the right decision, consequences follow. Had Jackson never left all those years ago, had he not left again after their reunion, Hugo might have been able to tell him that wasn't a lesson he needed to learn. What are you waiting for, Oshiro? The CO asked the smoking guard. Take him into custody. Hugo had his plan. Whatever you're thinking, Oshiro said while walking toward him, I'd forget about it. He took a pair of Faison cuffs from his side. You're not getting out of here. He's pretty ignorant if you ask me, a second guard said. He says he's innocent, but he's risking his life to rescue a torturer and murderer. He's a Solarezian, a third guard said. What else would you expect? They laughed. The laughter and comment annoyed Hugo, but the news about Akura shocked him. Had she tortured and murdered someone? Was that her crime? The CO shot him. Hugo immediately felt dazed and confused, and the pain brought him to his knees. Faison energy prevented an energist from using their abilities unless they were willing to cause themselves worse pain. Faison energy was fatal to energists and non-energists. It was a perfect weapon for prison guards. The CO wasn't incompetent. Hugo should have expected that. You handle situations differently than Jackson. Hugo glanced at the blur that was Akura. Don't struggle. I don't want you to get hurt. Did she think he took that hit on purpose? He used his geo energy to drop all the guards through the floor, except for the CO who evaded the tactic. Doing so caused enough pain to lay him out on his back. Breathing heavily, he lay there and didn't move. Video cameras have watched your every move, the CO said. More guards are on their way. If you thought you could fight past me, you're more ignorant than I thought. Jackson came to mind. Even in Solares, sometimes life was hard for Solaresians. Jackson never took people's disrespect. He demanded respect from his opponents, whether mentally, physically, or as a pyro and arrow energist. If Hugo fought hard like Jackson did, he figured he could end this. He wouldn't. He wasn't Jackson. They always had their own way of handling situations. The CO was trying to do his job. Hugo couldn't fault him for that. He turned himself over and forced himself to see clearly. I'll give you a chance to give yourself up. But if you don't, I'll take care of you myself. In the short silence that followed, Hugo heard the reinforcements. If the CO wouldn't believe his innocence, he couldn't say anything to make him believe the truth. Without a word, he struggled onto his feet. I see, CO said. You'll regret your decision. Hugo versus Takashi. The CO placed Akura near the wall next to the middle lift and bound her to it with light. The CO could generate light and manipulate it, which meant he was a genetic Luce energist. If Hugo and Akura were to escape, he'd have to outsmart the CO before the other guards arrived. If he pulled that off, they would make it. Combating the CO's Luce energy without his Geo energy and with immense pain racking his body would be a big mistake. Time to play to his strengths. What are you waiting for? The CO demanded. Come at me. If Hugo used his abilities to accomplish a few things at once, he could take all the pain and rest afterward. But this would leave him vulnerable if he messed up. Life was about risk. He wasn't too worried. He had needed the CO to let go of Akura's chain. Now he could make his escape plan work. He would block the exits to close off the area. He took a deep breath. With gritted teeth, he collapsed the ceilings over the corridors, used stones from the walls to block the lifts, and removed the stones underneath the CO. He saw a flash of light before he fell to his knees again, feeling the after effects of Phison energy. Through blurry vision, he glanced in the CO's direction, and he was surprised to see the CO standing in the same spot and watching him writhe in pain. He didn't understand what happened. The CO should have fallen below. However, he wasn't that surprised. He managed to avoid it. He created a light screen in that flash of light. He heard Akura. He realized CO figured he'd try the same tactic. I'm not as inexperienced as the others, the CO said, taking a few steps toward him. Quit this nonsense before you get yourself killed. He might be wrong, but Hugo felt the CO was running a bit hot and cold. He moved back, trying to focus before he made himself stand. Hand-to-hand combat it is. He ran toward the CO and noticed a flash of light. He ran into an invisible wall that repelled him and sent him flying backward. He landed on the collapsed debris from the blocked corridor. He heard guards on the other side of the debris. They were blasting through it. Beware the flash of light. Hugo climbed to his feet. He ran toward the CO again. He saw a flash of light, one-handed to his left, and continued to run. He avoided one light screen. Another flash of light made Hugo one hand over to his left and run at a curve. He heard the guards making progress through the debris. The CO shot a spear of light from his hand, and Hugo dropped himself through the floor to avoid it. An explosion followed, which blasted part of the floor apart. The only way his plan would have worked was to get the CO to use his Luce energy against him, but he didn't think the CO would use it so soon. Was the CO still trying to apprehend him or take him out like he said he would? While laying on a stone platform, created using the stones that made up the floor, Hugo stood on his feet and caught his breath. The CO stood above, watching him. Trying to keep the platform steady in midair sent pain through Hugo's body. The CO watched as he winced in pain, and he and his platform wavered. The CO had a smug expression on his face. After a brief moment, Hugo smiled. Using their fight to his advantage, Hugo had brought Akira through the floor. He freed her from her restraints, except for her chains. Immediately suspicious of Hugo's smile, CO turned to discover his prisoner was gone. Hugo brought himself to the ground and ran to her. The Phison effects were slowly leaving him, but they weren't gone. He still felt as if he might collapse at any moment. "We've got to move," he told her. They stood beside each other and saw as the CO leapt from the hole he created to stand behind them. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" CO had a serious expression on his face as he brought a spear of light into his hand. Hugo stepped in front of Akira when a thought hit him. If she was a telepath, couldn't she have gotten herself out? They wouldn't have sent her to this prison. Her abilities would have made her too dangerous. He had discovered something else that made the situation seem wrong. Perhaps they didn't know about her abilities. The same had happened with him. Hugo moved the walls to set up 3 barriers to block off the corridor. Doing this made him feel like someone was repeatedly punching him in the chest, which caused him to breathe heavily. The CO blasted through one of his barriers. "We should head out," Hugo managed to say. "Those barriers won't hold him back." "We'll be fine," she said. "You're starting to understand." She stepped beside him, and he was sure she noticed the puzzled expression now on his face. "Even though I have the ability to escape this place, I was here because I was waiting on someone." Hugo was about to say, "I know, me," but he didn't get a chance. "He's about to arrive," Akira said. "You didn't have to get involved." He watched her reveal a short smile. So, she hadn't been waiting to see him? No, he knew without a doubt that this was Akira. Jackson had led him to her. Was Jackson on his way here too? That didn't make sense. "However, I realized you wouldn't be you if you hadn't." The CO blasted through his second barrier. Trying to move the walls a second time brought Hugo to a knee, clutching at his chest. That wouldn't have worked anyway. Trying to move the walls a second time might have brought the prison down, so he tried to think of something else. The CO destroyed his third barrier. Hugo watched him, wondering who was about to arrive and how he was going to help. "Surrender, Akira. I don't want you to die at my hands," CO said. The way he spoke to her boggled Hugo's mind. Did they know each other? He heard sorrow in his voice. Then he heard a lift behind them. His first thought was more guards. "Mr. Minamoto, I'm sorry," Akira said. Hugo heard a loud rumbling before the noisy crash of an explosive force. Light blue energy forced the CO down the corridor into a wall. Hugo heard the sound of thunder. A thunder energist was nearby. Hugo and Akira turned to see who had arrived on the lift. He saw a stranger holding a firearm. She had been waiting for him. "I was," Akira said. "Meet my younger brother, Junior." Alright guys, that was a long one, but that was part 2. I will be bringing you part 3 tomorrow, and you can find out who Junio is and what's going to happen next in Hugo's story. Thanks for listening. Bye. Oh, and if you have any comments, questions, concerns, whatever, I'll listen and take them. Thank you. Bye.